some of this, I think we touched on, earlier in our discussion, and we just want to think recognize and highlight the fact that as we are continuing to experience the impacts from the pandemic, as we talked about earlier, as it's leading to closures, as it's leading to these hybridized roles, as it's leading to not even be able to be in the presence of the collections that we're tasked with managing, there is a lot of emotional and mental impact to that. And in a previous webinar, we had advocated for being able to find that peace and well-being and to have that be a part of not only the if you're in a current position, but in the job seeking as well, because it can be very taxing. You can get a sense of the doldrums for sure. And so, as we introduce this section, kind of be thinking of the changes that you're experiencing and be paying attention to those. And this idea that, as Rachel had talked about the great resignation, how this can be an evolution for yourself in terms of your career too. As we think about everything from where we're working, what we're working on, how we want to consider our own identities within that. And so earlier we talked about the overlap, the Venn diagram of your professional life and social life. You kind of pay attention to that again for what makes sense to you and to kind of apply and ration, accordingly. And so part of that, I know we touched on this before, but again, there are parallels in other industries right now that I think are very instructive for us to look at. I know we touched on this in a previous webinar as well. I would encourage you to look at some of the industries that were heavily and initially and fundamentally impacted by COVID-19. Here I'm thinking of hospitality industry, the travel industry, because in some ways they're kind of our future forecasters. They're further along in this process for what is impacted every possible sector of work that can be imagined. So where there are insights, I know there's a lot of really great webinars and free and low cost resources that are made available. There's even those that are sharing kind of their journey along the way as they experiencing these things. And there's a few accounts that we can add to the resources to look to as a way of kind of understanding that. And then coming to this last point, this is something that I find very interesting, especially as someone that came about as an accidental archivist or kind of came into the field maybe in a bit of a non-traditional way, and that is considering your identity within the context of the collection you're managing. And so for me, it comes down to linguistics. The idea of feeling such a connection to the collections and archives that you're managing, that you're saying that it's yours. And I just ask you to pay attention to that, because I do think there are potential mental impacts in having that mindset, especially when there's challenges to being able to do that, very practical challenges, or in some ways, I would say unavoidable, insurmountable challenges to doing that. And another reason to offer that too is to offer more kind of broad-based inclusive language about collections, because I think that's also a very good way to consider the job hunt and looking for positions. So as much as there's a sense of identifying with the material, especially if you have a subject matter interest in the collections that you are being tasked with or that you're seeking to work for, just paying attention to that and how that may play into perception of self. And, this idea of how can the collections benefit everybody? How can the collections have a shared sense of ownership? How can the collections be embraced, or just even to raise the awareness for communities that have no idea about this material for many, many reasons, with access and equity being very much tied to that as well. So those are some things that we have thought of in regards to that. We just see it as really fundamental to these changes that we're seeing, and is a large part of the process of seeking work today.
I love that you've made this human centric, like we are humans first and foremost, and how to continually come back to that as we approach our work, as we approach our relationship with the collections, our colleagues, our field. I think the more we can do that and sort of evaluate what it is that we're dealing with, challenges and opportunities with a human centric approach, I think all of us would be a lot better off. And I just wanted to like underscore and reemphasize your point about these last 18 months and then some, in terms of it being hard to varying degrees for everybody. A lot of people are still carrying and experiencing trauma from the current events of these last few years. So, just to really move into this next year, and especially if you're going into the job search, which is an incredibly personal activity to try and go through, and applying yourself and putting yourself out there and being vulnerable, just recognizing that and the emotional mental work attached to that and where you are with your own mental health. I'm a huge proponent for getting mental health support. And especially these last 18 months, many of us uh, have been diagnosed belatedly with different mental or a neurotypical disorders. So just know that everybody is going through it. And especially if you're in the process of seeking a job, definitely give yourself the grace and support you need to do that.
And so as we come to these points, I think they, relate quite closely to some of what we've said so far. Really this idea of kind of viewing things within your specific worldview to looking more largely, and in particular for the job seeking process, really encouraging empathy for potential employers. Just as Rachel had said, we're all, the past 18 months have portended so much that's impacted everybody. It can become very habitual to think about those impacts personally, with your family, with your friends, with those that are within your community. But let's not lose sight of that when we apply for work. Let's be thinking about that for hiring managers. Let's be thinking about that for human resources and talent management staff. Let's be thinking about that for recruiters as well. Another very important aspect. Certainly in our consulting work, we both try to approach each of our projects with that grace, because we don't know necessarily where the organization is at, where the employees are at that you're communicating with. And the reason I bring this up in a practical level is, in applying for a position and not hearing back in a certain amount of time, to not take it as a personal reflection, to not take it as, the job went to somebody else, but there could be internal factors you may not be aware of. And so what I'd advocate here is, for lack of a better way of saying it, kind of a patient persistence, being able to maintain a cadence that can seem right in terms of showing your interest in the role, showing your dedication to pursuing that opportunity, but also, again, being able to take that step back and understand some of the other factors outside of your control, that may be at play for this hiring process. To the next point, certainly promoting industry success. Let's toot some horns. And let's really try to, again, look to where there is the success and to be able to promote it. So promoting the work of colleagues online, whether through LinkedIn, social media. In October, we have National Archives Month coming up, which is a terrific opportunity to be able to highlight, the work that we do professionally. Again, those are things that overall are related to the health of the industry, but also could have more immediate impacts as you're looking for work. And then in terms of the next point, which we've touched upon a few times, really looking at what are things that can be adapted to the work that you're doing now. What are strategies for potential industries and sectors where there was a huge deficit in hiring for a long period of time? For those that were impacted, what did they do? What were strategies they had around it? Those are things definitely to keep in mind through this process. And then on this final point, really, I know there was a lot of kind of early talk during the what I'll say was the initial stage of the pandemic. I remember seeing things about now's an opportunity to reinvent yourself. And we're not necessarily advocating jumping, being fully into that, but just looking at what are some, because there's so many excellent resources that are out there. Again, a lot available free, low cost, to be able just to adapt those to your schedule as you have the time and opportunity, because there is so much that we can learn from each other. And ultimately, that will get to this overall investment in yourself. And as we have the main topic of this section being this idea of our own self-awareness and understanding how we change, being able to grab onto some of those resources and see how they'll resonate personally, and then how that can be reflected back out there and outward as you're looking for work.
Hmm. Yeah, investing in yourself is never a bad idea. So if you've got the time, space, capacity, or otherwise to pick something up, even if it's just like a quick 1 hour webinar, or if you sign up for a full course, like whatever it is you have room for, if you can invest in yourself, you can then take that with you wherever you go. So I wholeheartedly love that strategy.